They told him a new boss was coming in today. He had no idea how much his life was about to change. One wrong turn and everything he thought he knew about his future fell apart on the floor between them. He thought it was just a joke, but she heard every single word. He called her boss as a joke. She looked him dead in the eye and said the 4 words that changed everything. Not for long, handsome. That's what she told him. And nothing in this factory town was ever going to be the same again. He never expected to fall in love with his boss. He never even expected to keep his job past Friday. But by the end of that autumn, Ethan Cole would be standing in front of the whole town, asking himself one question. How does a broke, widowed mechanic from the wrong side of the tracks end up marrying the richest woman in the state? If you've ever believed your best chapter might come after your hardest one, stay with me to the end of this story, because the answer is coming, and it is not what you think. And if stories like this one remind you that it is never too late for love to find you again, do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe, because we tell one of these every single week, and I promise you do not want to miss what happens next. Ethan Cole had learned, the hard way, that life did not care about your plans. 3 years earlier, he had been a husband, a father, and a proud line supervisor at Hale Industries, the manufacturing plant that had built half the houses in Millbrook, Ohio, in one way or another. Then his wife Sarah got sick. It happened fast, the way the worst things always do. And within 8 months, Ethan was a 35-year-old widower standing at a graveside in the rain, holding the small, shaking hand of a 4-year-old girl who did not yet understand that her mother was never coming home. Lily was 7 now. She had her mother's laugh and her father's stubborn chin, and she was, without question, the only reason Ethan Cole still got out of bed at 5 every morning. Money had been tight before Sarah's illness. After the medical bills, it was a different kind of tight, the kind that kept a grown man awake at 2 in the morning, doing math in his head that never came out right. Ethan had sold the house they'd bought together and moved himself and Lily into a small rented 2-bedroom on Delancey Street, the kind with a leaky faucet and a landlord who took his time. He worked the same job he always had, only now with double the overtime and half the sleep, keeping the factory's aging machines running so 300 families in Millbrook could keep their paychecks coming. He did not complain. He had learned that complaining did not pay the electric bill. He simply worked, and he loved his daughter fiercely. And he told himself that was enough. Everything at Hale Industries changed on a Tuesday morning in September, the day old Richard Hale, the company's founder and Ethan's late father's closest friend, finally handed the keys to his only daughter. Richard had built the company from a single machine shop in 1988 into the backbone of the entire town, and everyone assumed that when he retired, some outside hire in an expensive suit would come take over and start cutting jobs to please a spreadsheet somewhere in another state. Instead, Richard called an all-staff meeting on the factory floor and introduced his daughter Victoria Hale as the new chief executive officer of Hale Industries. 300 workers in hard hats and safety vests watched the woman in a tailored charcoal blazer step up to the microphone, and not one of them, including Ethan, expected what came next. Victoria Hale did not look like she belonged on a factory floor, and she knew it. She had spent 12 years building her reputation in Chicago's corporate world, clawing her way up through rooms that never wanted her there, constantly having to prove that being Richard Hale's daughter did not mean she had been handed anything. She had come home to Millbrook only because her father's heart had given him a warning, a quiet little scare that made him finally admit he could not run the company forever. She loved her father fiercely, and she loved this dusty, stubborn little town more than she ever let herself say out loud. But she had absolutely no intention of being seen as some rich man's daughter playing dress-up as a CEO. She intended to prove to every person on that factory floor that she had earned the title on the door. Ethan first saw her 3 days later in the hallway outside the executive offices, and it did not go well. He came around the corner with an armful of maintenance work orders, moving fast because the stamping line was down, and every minute cost the company money, and he plowed directly into a woman moving just as fast in the opposite direction, sending both of their papers scattering across the polished floor. He started apologizing before he even looked up, already down on one knee gathering pages, and when he finally raised his eyes to hand them back, he found himself looking into a pair of sharp green eyes that he recognized, a half-second too late, from the meeting 3 days earlier. You're the new boss," he said, which was possibly the least intelligent thing he had said in a decade. She looked at him for a long moment, took her papers back without a word, and walked away. Ethan stood there in the hallway, feeling like the biggest fool in Millbrook, Ohio. He tried to forget about it. He genuinely tried. But Hale Industries was not a large place, and over the following weeks Ethan kept running into Victoria Hale in exactly the moments he least wanted to. She walked the factory floor every single morning, which no executive at that company had done in a decade, asking questions of the machine operators, writing notes in a small leather notebook, staying 2 full hours past the end of the day's shift reviewing maintenance logs that Ethan himself had written. She was sharp. She caught a supply chain inefficiency in the second week that saved the company nearly $40,000 a quarter, a detail even the plant manager had missed. The workers who had braced themselves for layoffs and outsourcing slowly started to relax, then slowly started to respect her, and Ethan, against his own better judgment, found himself doing the same. It was in the break room on a rainy Thursday in October that Ethan made the joke that started everything. He was sitting with 2 of his crew, Marcus and Dale, venting about a new safety protocol memo that had come down that morning, and in the middle of his complaining he threw up his hands and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "I mean, what am I gonna do, huh? She's my boss. Guess I just gotta smile and take it like the rest of you poor saps." Marcus and Dale laughed. What Ethan did not know, because his back was to the door, was that Victoria Hale had walked in exactly 4 words earlier, drawn by the smell of the break room's terrible coffee, and had heard every single syllable of it. She did not say anything. She simply poured her coffee, watched the back of his head for a long moment with an expression no one could quite read, and walked back out. Ethan found out about it the way small towns always let a man find things out, which is to say everyone else knew before he did. Dale pulled him aside at the end of shift, wincing. "Man, she was standing right there when you said that." Ethan felt his stomach drop straight through the concrete floor. He spent the whole drive home rehearsing an apology. Certain Monday morning would bring a pink slip with his name on it, and he barely slept, staring at Lily's nightlight glowing under her door and wondering how he was going to explain to a 7-year-old that Daddy had lost his job for running his mouth in a break room. That weekend was the longest of Ethan's life. He took Lily to the park on Saturday morning like always, pushed her on the swings, listened to her chatter about a school project on butterflies, and the whole time a cold knot sat in his stomach that he could not swallow down. He thought about Sarah, the way he often did in moments of quiet panic, wondering what she would have told him to do. Sarah had always been the brave one, the one who marched us to hard conversations instead of hiding from them. "You don't get to feel sorry for yourself, Ethan Cole," he could almost hear her saying. "You go in there Monday and you own it like a man." So that is what he decided to do, even if it cost him the job that was keeping a roof over his daughter's head. He would rather lose the paycheck than let Lily grow up watching her father run from his mistakes. On Sunday night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, drafting and redrafting an apology letter he intended to hand-deliver to Victoria Hale's office the moment he clocked in. He wrote about respect. He wrote about the pressure the crew had been under with the new safety protocols. He wrote, and then crossed out, 3 different versions of the sentence, "I never meant any disrespect to you personally," because none of them sounded honest enough. By midnight, he had a single crumpled page that simply said he was sorry, that she deserved better than a cheap joke from a man who barely knew her, and that whatever she decided to do about it, he would accept it and thank her for the chance she had given the whole plant floor these past few weeks. He folded it, put it in his jacket pocket, and finally managed a few hours of restless sleep. He never got the chance to hand her that letter. When Ethan arrived at the plant Monday morning, the sticky note on his locker was waiting, and everything that followed happened so fast that the folded apology stayed forgotten in his jacket pocket for 2 more weeks, until Lily found it doing laundry and asked him, very seriously, what it said. Ethan told her the truth, that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and have to be brave enough to say sorry, and Lily, who took everything with the gravity of a much older soul, nodded and said, "Like when I broke Emma's crayons and had to say sorry even though I was scared." Ethan had laughed until his eyes stung, because out of the mouths of 7-year-olds came the plainest wisdom in the world. The promotion changed more than Ethan's paycheck, though it certainly changed that too. Enough that for the first time in 3 years, he did not lie awake doing anxious math at 2 in the morning. It changed how the crew looked at him, with a new kind of respect that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the fact that a man who fixed machines with his own 2 hands was now the one deciding how the whole operation ran. Dale started calling him boss with a grin every morning, just to watch Ethan wince. Marcus, more thoughtful than he let on, pulled Ethan aside one afternoon and told him quietly that, Half the guys on the floor had been waiting years for someone who actually understood the work to get a seat at that table, and that Ethan owed it to all of them not to forget where he came from. Ethan promised he never would, and he never did. Victoria, for her part, found herself unable to stop thinking about the man from the mezzanine office in a way that unsettled her more than any hostile board member ever had. She had built her entire career on a foundation of careful distance, on never letting anyone get close enough to use it against her, and here was a widowed machine supervisor with a scar over his eyebrow, and a little girl who called her by her first name within the first 10 minutes of meeting her, quietly dismantling every wall she had spent 12 years constructing. She told herself it was nothing, that she simply admired his work ethic, that checking on the fever medicine dosage twice that Friday night had been ordinary kindness and nothing more. She was still telling herself that story on the drive home, 3 hours after the mermaid movie ended, smiling at a stoplight for no reason at all. By early November, the two of them had settled into a rhythm neither one openly acknowledged as courtship, though anyone on the factory floor could have told you exactly what it was. Victoria began arriving early enough to walk the floor before the day shift started, timing it, whether she admitted it to herself or not, to overlap with the tail end of Ethan's overnight maintenance checks. They would talk by the loading dock over bad vending machine coffee, about nothing important, about the weather, about Lily's butterfly project, about a supplier problem in Ohio, and those 15 minutes became the best part of both of their days. Lily, meanwhile, had appointed herself the unofficial matchmaker of the entire operation, drawing crayon pictures of Daddy and Miss Victoria holding hands under a sun with a smiling face, which she proudly displayed on the refrigerator despite Ethan's flustered protests. Monday morning came, and instead of a termination notice, Ethan found a sticky note on his locker asking him to report to the CEO's office at 9 sharp. He walked up those stairs like a man walking to his own sentencing. Victoria's office was on the top floor, corner windows overlooking the whole plant, and when he stepped inside, she was standing at the window with her back to him, arms crossed, city light behind her. "Close the door," she said. He did. She turned around slowly and for one long, agonizing second said nothing at all. Then, to his utter disbelief, the corner of her mouth twitched upward. "So," she said, "I'm your boss." Ethan opened his mouth to apologize, and she held up a hand to stop him. "Not for long, handsome," she said, and let the silence sit there just long enough to watch his face go through several stages of confusion before she finally explained herself. She was restructuring the maintenance department, effective that morning, and she was promoting him to head of plant operations, reporting directly to her, not as an employee she happened to oversee, but as a partner in fixing the very inefficiencies he had been complaining about. Apparently, for years, in memos nobody upstairs had ever bothered reading until she did. It should have ended there, a good story about an unexpected promotion, the kind of thing Ethan would tell at Thanksgiving for the rest of his life. But something had shifted in that office that had nothing to do with job titles. Over the following weeks, Victoria began stopping by Ethan's new office on the mezzanine level more often than any operational question required. She asked about the machines, yes, but she also started asking about him, about the small scar over his eyebrow, which turned out to be from a forklift accident in his 20s, about the photograph of Sarah he kept on his desk, which he explained without flinching but with a quiet weight in his voice that told her everything she needed to know about the kind of man he was. And one Friday afternoon, when the daycare called to say Lily had a fever and Ethan had no one else to call, Victoria Hale, CEO of Hale Industries, told him to go, covered his afternoon meetings herself, and then, an hour later, showed up at his rental house on Delancey Street with a bag of soup, crackers, and children's fever medicine from the pharmacy, because she remembered, from one offhand comment weeks earlier, that his own mother lived 2 states away. Lily, feverish and cranky, took one look at the tall woman standing awkwardly in their small living room and asked, with the devastating honesty only a 7-year-old possesses, "Are you Daddy's girlfriend?" Victoria went bright red. Ethan nearly dropped the mug of tea he was holding, but instead of laughing it off and leaving as Ethan half expected, Victoria knelt down to Lily's eye level, smiled, and said, "Not yet, but I'd really like to be your friend first if that's okay with you." Lily considered this with great seriousness, the way children do, and finally said, "Okay. But you have to watch the mermaid movie with me." Victoria Hale, who had negotiated 7-figure supplier contracts without blinking, sat cross-legged on a second-hand rug for 2 hours and watched an animated mermaid movie with a 6-7-year-old, and something in Ethan's chest cracked open that had been sealed shut since the funeral 3 years before. Of course, nothing good in this life comes without a fight to keep it. Word travels fast in a town where everybody's cousin works with everybody else's aunt, and by November the rumor mill in Millbrook was in full swing. Some of it was harmless gossip, some of it was not. A member of the Hale Industries board, a cold, calculating man named Gerald Whitfield, who had wanted the CEO position for himself and resented Victoria for taking it, saw an opportunity. He began quietly suggesting to other board members that Victoria's judgment was compromised, that a CEO who was personally involved with a subordinate employee, regardless of how that employee had been promoted, was a liability, an HR risk, a story waiting to hit the local paper and embarrass the family name. Right when Richard Hale's health made the company especially vulnerable to a takeover bid Whitfield himself had quietly been engineering for months. It came to a head at a tense November board meeting that Ethan was not even supposed to know about, but Marcus, who had a cousin in accounting, tipped him off the night before. Ethan showed up anyway, standing at the back of the room in his work jacket while men in $1,000 suits debated whether the woman he had fallen in love with was fit to run her own father's company because of him. Whitfield stood and made his case coldly, calling Victoria's judgment into question, hinting that the board should consider a leadership change while there was still time to protect the Hale name. Victoria sat perfectly still through all of it, her jaw tight, her hands folded, every inch the composed executive she had spent 12 years becoming. And then Ethan, against every instinct that told him to keep his head down and his mouth shut, walked to the front of that boardroom. He told them about the $40,000 a quarter she had saved the company in her second week. He told them about the machine operators who used to dread every management change and now brought their coffee thermoses to the floor every morning because they trusted her. He told them, his voice shaking but steady, about a CEO who had knelt on a secondhand rug to watch a mermaid movie with a sick little girl who was not even hers, not because it looked good, not because anyone was watching, but because that was simply who she was. "You want to talk about judgment," Ethan said, looking directly at Gerald Whitfield. "Then let's talk about the judgment it takes to walk into a company everybody expected her to fail at, and turn it around in 90 days. That's not a liability. That's the best thing that's happened to this company in 20 years. And if loving her is a mistake, then I made it with both eyes open, and I'd make it again tomorrow." The room went dead silent. Richard Hale, who had come in quietly through the side door partway through the meeting, and had been standing unnoticed near the back, began, slowly, to clap. One by one, board members who had actually paid attention to the numbers over the past 3 months joined him, until even Whitfield, outmaneuvered and exposed, had no room left to argue. The vote to consider a leadership change failed, 11-1. Whitfield resigned from the board 2 weeks later, and it later came out, through the very supply chain audit Victoria had ordered in her first month, that he had been steering contracts to a company he secretly held shares in. The real reason he had wanted her gone in the first place had never been about propriety at all. It had been about greed, and Victoria's diligence had caught it before it cost the company millions. Victoria found Ethan afterward in the empty parking lot, snow just beginning to fall under the security lights. She did not say anything at first. She simply walked up to him, took his face in both hands, and kissed him, right there in front of the loading dock cameras and anyone who happened to be working the late shift, not caring anymore who saw or what they said. "You could have stayed quiet," she said when she finally pulled back. "You could have let me handle it and kept your job safe." Ethan brushed a snowflake from her hair and shrugged, that same crooked grin from the very first hallway collision. "Guess I finally figured out what you meant that first day in your office," he said. "Not for long, handsome. I always thought you meant the promotion. Turns out you meant this. You were never gonna just be my boss. I think some part of you already knew that before I did." There was a harder night too, one Ethan never talked about at Thanksgiving, that came in the middle of that same tense November. 2 nights before the board meeting, with the rumor mill grinding louder every day, and Whitfield's allies making sure certain gossip reached certain reporters, Ethan came home to find a letter from Lily's school counselor waiting in the mailbox, gently flagging that Lily had grown withdrawn at recess and had mentioned to a teacher that she was scared her daddy was going to lose his job because of her. Ethan sat on the front step in the cold for a long time after Lily went to bed that night, the folded letter in his hands, feeling like the world was closing in from every direction at once. He almost called Victoria to tell her to end things before they cost him everything: his job, his daughter's peace of mind, the fragile stability he had spent 3 hard years rebuilding brick by brick. He picked up the phone twice. He put it down twice. It was Lily, oddly enough, who talked him out of giving up, without ever knowing she had done it. She padded out of her room past midnight in her socks, unable to sleep, and found her father still sitting at the kitchen table staring at nothing. She climbed into his lap the way she used to when she was smaller, and asked him, with the plain directness that only children have, whether he loved Miss Victoria. Ethan, too tired to lie to a 7-year-old at midnight, admitted that he did. "Then don't be scared," Lily said simply, resting her head against his chest. "Mommy said being scared just means something matters. She told me that when I didn't want to start kindergarten." Ethan held his daughter in the quiet kitchen and let himself cry for the first time in longer than he could remember. Not out of grief this time, but out of something that felt for once like hope. He walked into that boardroom 2 nights later with Sarah's old advice and his daughter's midnight wisdom both sitting steady in his chest. And that, more than any speech he rehearsed, was what carried him to the front of that room. In the weeks after the board meeting, Millbrook did what small towns do best, which is talk about everything twice and then move on to the next thing entirely. The story of the plant supervisor who stood up in front of the whole board for his CEO spread through the diner on Main Street and the pews of First Baptist and the bleachers at the Friday night football games until it had been exaggerated in 6 different directions, in every version ending the same way, with the 2 of them together and Gerald Whitfield gone for good. Richard Hale, delighted by the whole affair in the way only a proud father can be, took to introducing Ethan at community events as the best hire my daughter ever fired herself into making, a joke that never once failed to make Victoria groan and Ethan turn faintly red. They were married the following June, in the backyard of the house Ethan and Lily had since moved into, a modest place on the edge of town that Victoria had insisted on buying together. Plain and unassuming, nothing like the estate she could easily have afforded, because she said she had fallen in love with a simple life long before she had fallen in love with him. Richard Hale, healthier now and fully retired, walked his daughter halfway down the aisle before stopping to let a beaming 7-year-old Lily, in a flower crown and a yellow dress, walk the rest of the way at Victoria's side as her flower girl, a role she took with the same fierce seriousness she brought to everything. Marcus and Dale sat in the second row, still occasionally reminding Ethan, to his everlasting embarrassment, that the whole thing had started because he could not keep his mouth shut in a break room. So if you have ever wondered, in the quiet hours when the bills feel too heavy and the house feels too empty, whether life still has a second chapter waiting for you after the hardest one you have already survived, let this be your answer. Ethan Cole did not find love because he went looking for it. He found it because he kept showing up, kept working with his hands and his whole heart, kept loving his daughter without asking for anything in return, and let a joke in a break room open a door he never even knew was there. Victoria Hale did not fall for a title or a promotion. She fell for a tired, honest, ordinary man who turned out to be the strongest person in that entire boardroom. And somewhere in Millbrook, Ohio, tonight, a little girl who once asked a stranger if she was her daddy's girlfriend is fast asleep down the hall from 2 parents who are still, after everything, absolutely certain that not for long, handsome was the truest thing either one of them ever said. If this story reminded you that it is never too late to be loved the way you deserve, tell us where you're watching from tonight in the comments. Share it with someone who needs a little hope this evening, and subscribe, because we have a brand new story waiting for you, same time, next week.